Yeah. تليفوني عالصامت، تعرف أنا مش فاضي، موضوع مش ضابط. تعرف أنا مش فاضي، تتكلم عن شي غير ماني قدامي. أنا مش فاضي، تتكلم عن شي غير ماني قدامي. أنا مش فاضي، تليفوني عالصامت، تعرف أنا مش فاضي، موضوع مش ضابط. تعرف أنا مش فاضي، تتكلم عن شي غير ماني قدامي. أنا مش فاضي، تتكلم عن شي غير ماني قدامي. أنا مش فاضي.
To finally welcome singer-songwriters and instrumentalists Raul Midón and Alex Cuba. Along with Palestinian artist Mays Albaik. This conversation, as always, is always moderated by our amazing student Vanessa Robinson, who is a senior at NYU Abu Dhabi. So before I leave it to Vanessa, I want to remind everyone to book your tickets for the concert on November 3rd on Thursday at 7:30 p.m. at the East Plaza, and it will have an opening act with Fafa as well.
So we're going to kick this off classic NYUAD style, where basically we'll ask them to see what first each other and being like, oh, like where are you from? And then like that, like continues the conversation about, oh, like usually people come from major places. Well, I'm from here, but I have a passport in this country as well. So following that, all of us have a national identification document, like a passport. So hypothetically, if you were to have an identification card about your identity as an artist, what would you include in it?
That one would be heavy for me.
Anyone want to start first?
Okay. This is one of those subjects that's very interesting. I'm coming from a jazz standpoint, and one of the most interesting things, when you're a singer, part of your identity comes in just because everybody's voice is a little different, right? So there isn't a thing. So you have, everybody has a guitar that is made, by a lot of times by a factory, or a saxophone, and people use certain kind of reeds. And yet, even with all of that, the way that you touch the instrument, it gives you an identity. The way that you pluck, or the way that you blow, or the way that you, and that is something that I believe is a conscious thing. There's a lot of musicians that are very good musicians, and they are in an orchestra, or they're in a symphony or something like that, and it's not about identity at all. It's about being good and having it and being able to execute, what you're doing. When you're an artist, and if you want to be an artist, then you start thinking about identity. That what makes you you. And that has all to do with so many variables. I'll just tell one little story, and then I'll maybe give it over to Alex. He can talk about that too. But one of the things that I wished for when I was growing up, not being able to see, whenever I heard somebody play, I always was really sad that I couldn't see how they were doing that, because part of, imitating and listening to people and being inspired by people is looking, okay, how is that person getting that sound? How are they doing it? And I didn't have that advantage. So that was something that always made me sad. The advantage, in a way, is that I couldn't see how people were playing. And so it kind of made me develop, even though I was trained and had lessons, it kind of, I think, gave me a little advantage in the sense that I did develop sort of my own way of So that's an angle.
That's beautiful. Well, I'm always intrigued, how people hear it. I mean, I believe we all hear music in a different way. Somehow, a way, something unique in all of us, In my case, I was first for a long time an instrumentalist. I started on guitar. My father is a teacher. He started teaching me when I was 6 years old. When I turned 14, I saw somebody playing electric bass in my town in Cuba. And I was like, what is that? I asked my dad, what is that instrument? And he said, oh, it's a bass, electric bass. You like it? I love it. So from that point forward, I started playing bass, and that's all I did for a long time. When I started writing songs, I was very shy, singing them, because I didn't locate my voice inside the country where I was coming from. I mean, I was singing from a different point of view, and this has a lot to do with identity for me, because I believe that I wouldn't gain the identity that I have today as a musician if I didn't go outside of my culture, if I didn't move and find, go to where I live, which is Canada. Basically, my voice it wasn't the typical Cuban sounding voice, which is normally a big, bright voice in order to command like a 16-piece band or something like that. You gotta go like, hey, my man, And I was coming from a different point of view. I was coming from the soulful, from the, I don't know, I just felt that, something else. And for example, my father would tell me, when I was, when I wanted to show him a song that I was writing or something, my father would tell me, hey, I don't think you should sing, because I don't think you have the voice of a singer. He wasn't being a bad daddy or anything. I was just deep into the bass, I was studying Jaco Pastorius and all of the big, heavy players. And so my father didn't want me to confuse my way, He was pretty sure that I was going to be a bass player only, right? Well, things changed a lot when I moved to Canada. I applied to a conference as a bass player, and I was happy to be accepted because they were choosing delegates. And then the second day of the conference, we were all a little relaxed, and I asked somebody that was there with a guitar to lend me the guitar, and I started singing. And one of the teachers that was giving the conference heard me and said, "Hey, you apply here as a bass player and all that, and we're all happy you're here. We love your bass playing and all that, but I didn't know you could sing." And I went, "No, I don't sing. No. Put the guitar away." He said, "No. If I was you, I would leave that up to the audience when we play the show tomorrow, because that was a big show to end the conference." And that was my beginning in Canada. So it gave me this big introduction, and as soon as I opened my mouth, everybody was on their feet and clapping. I was like, "Oh my God, I guess there is no way going back." So in a lot of ways, the fact that I went outside of my country and my culture and found somewhere else has given me a huge music identity.
What's interesting about that also, I'll just say what brings up to me, I was talking to George Benson. Everybody knows who George Benson is. And his manager told him, "Nobody wants to hear you sing." Imagine that. Imagine George Benson never singing. For years, he didn't sing.
Amazing.
And then when he started working with Tommy LaPuma, Tommy's like, "Oh my God, you gotta sing." And the whole guitar vocal thing that George Benson is known for, besides his special guitar playing, is because Tommy LaPuma told him, "You gotta sing." So, it's
Takes one person.
I'll sort of complete this by saying this. When you're becoming an artist, you have to understand that some feedback is the right feedback and some is the wrong. There's a lot of negativity. A lot of people give you a lot of negative feedback, and you need to be able to tell the difference.
Absolutely.
I come at it a little bit differently. I'm a visual artist, but I think especially what you were saying, Raul, about what I hear that resonates a lot with me is that you're relating it to something very specific in the way that the body responds to a kind of expression. You're talking about plucking, you're talking about voice, and I think, you know, when I first kind of saw the question, I thought it was really interesting that you're framing it within passports, and my first instinct was, can I opt out? But actually what both of you guys just said is, you know, if someone did give you a little identity card, actually what you did is you threw it in the trash, and you kind of followed what your body was.
You have to create your own identity that is a combination of your experiences. You know, one of the things that I had struggled with as a writer is writing is very image driven, right? It's very visual. And not only don't I see, I've never seen. So I don't know what anything looks like, really. So what I have to do, first of all, I have to imagine the world. And second of all, I have to write from my perspective, which is a very strange thing. One of the things that I'm still trying to work on is, what does it mean to write from a blind person's perspective? And so I don't stray away from lyrics that are very, you know, an example of what I'm talking about, that there's a song I wrote called When You Call My Name, and one of the lyrics is, I don't know why, but I hear music in the rain, feel the sunlight in my brain, right? That kind of thing. And it's very much writing from a perspective of not trying to sort of plug in the cliches of what people write about, you know, the yellow moon staring down at you. I don't know, whatever. You know, that is another part of identity, is to figure out what your perspective is. And don't be afraid to write from that perspective.
Raul, I'm thinking of the song we wrote together, and that on my album.
Yes.
What do you say there?
Yeah.
I was blind, but now
Everything is new for me, new in almost every way.
Yeah.
Though I've been around the sun, a different me begins today. Lost inside my certainty, believing that my ways were wise. I was blind, but now I see. Time has opened up my eyes. Yeah, and that is just, you know, and for a long time, I was very shy about that, because I'm like, well, nobody's going to be able to relate to it because it's not visual. But, you know, you have to, what that cliche, right? What you know, right?
That's just so interesting to me. It reminds me of, I'm trying to think of how to connect like the other questions. Because everything like that all you said, like the specific questions, I was like, which one should I say next? But what I'm thinking of right now is Raul, what you said about like how you focus more about like how you perceive things as a blind person, how like you like express that in your music. And that actually reminded me of something that Alex said in an interview, because I was in my research, I was like, past interview, what you all said. And then past interview, you mentioned about how like you don't necessarily, like when talking, obviously like when making your art, you think about like different events that happen, like the past, present, just around. But how like you mentioned that it's not necessarily productive to just like, you mentioned that in your music in the sense of like, you rather focus on the emotions that these events inspire rather than the events themselves as a way, like that's how people connect and that's how this music is timeless. So my question for you all is like, relating to like how like you make music, like, not music, but art in general, universal and timeless, like how do you make your art, specifically you guys, how do you make your art universal so the topics that are discussed will be timeless and remain relevant for future generations?
There's a thing that I learned in like, I don't know, writing 101 or something like that, that I feel very, very strongly and continue to always think about it. Like, it's what Raul said again, the write what you know, but what it is actually the more honest, the more relatable, even though it becomes really, really specific. And I think what you just cited, I guess, from Alex's interview is about thinking about the emotion. It's something that I've been thinking about a lot. I mean, you know, when we were reading the briefing about the conversation, and we mentioned kind of how do our practices intersect with kind of socio-political questions that we have. And I think the more I work on my practice, the more I find it the most productive and also freeing to come at these questions from different ways. It becomes kind of like, art becomes a new lens to think about things that you know, like in my everyday are actually practical issues. They're very real, they're very kind of present and immediate, but with art, I mean, part of it is a little bit of escapism, but actually the other part of it is it allows me to be playful, rather than like super heavy, right? And being playful just opens up a lot of other ways of thinking about things.
Yeah, I don't think, this is my opinion, I don't think anyone should try to make their art universal. I think the fact that we are humans and we all, you know, feel the same things, we all need the same things. If you write from that standpoint, it's going to have a universality to it. You know, I think that some people make the mistake of saying, okay, I want to write a hit, you know, or I want to make this connect to everybody. And at least in my opinion, I think the more honest you are, the more you write from your standpoint, it's gonna connect.
There was a point where like I had to make peace with some people might not like me.
Right. Well, everybody has to make peace with that,
like,
right?
and but I think that moment was actually the best thing that happened to my art practice.
There you go.
Yeah.
Because then I'm no longer really worried about it exactly being universal, being everyone's thing.
Absolutely. Because no one is everyone's thing.
No.
Well, there is a lot that happens when you're not thinking. That's my preferred way of making music. The music that end up on my albums is the music that comes for me, not the one that I consciously go to find. You know, I go for some time collecting melodies and, you know, writing songs, and I really follow the intuition, you know, where the song wants me to go. This morning I was talking in one of the classes, you know, that maybe I've made a million mistakes in my life, in my career, because I haven't followed cliches in music, whatever, and a lot of labels, you know, use that as a way to make the artist immediately connect. For me, it's more about the art of things, you know. I listen deeply to where the song wants me to take it, and if I hear bagpipes, for example, in my song, I will go for bagpipes, even though it doesn't have anything to do with me. But I hear it and for a reason, I guess. If I hear it, it's for a reason. You know.
Just to be open to being inspired by anything and everything, and you know, it is a certain point of view. I mean, there are people who their goal is to become famous, and you know, that's a different thing.
And I think that if you're going to be universal, that is with you the day you're born. The same thing with if you're going to be, you know, a musician that has a certain, you know, sound, that's with you the day you're born. I was quoting John Coltrane this morning about the definition of talent, because it's something that I keep going back to. For him, or maybe, yeah, I'm quite certain, at least I read on the internet that this is his quote. The definition of talent is the ability to make something difficult sound easy. And that always makes me think, because you can't do that if you try to do it. So again, you have to be born with that.
That's true, but it's also, I mean, listen, I have to say that to be a good musician, you got to practice your ass off.
Absolutely.
There is no shortcut. And the way you make something sound easy is you just work on it and
Yes.
work on it and repeat it over and over again. I always say this about, there's a song in jazz called Giant Steps.
Yes.
And it's a John Coltrane song, and it has a billion chords in it. It moves from key to key very quickly, and it's one of those challenging things that, people, but it's only challenging because, in a way, because you think it's challenging, and because you don't really, it's so challenging that you're saying, well, this is too hard, I don't really want to play this is not a real song. But if you practice it, it becomes as easy as speaking.
Right.
It's something that I decided, a while ago, that I was going to be able to play Giant Steps in any key and sing it in any key. And so now Giant Steps is like the blues for me. But it's not because I'm a genius or anything like that. It's because I decided that this is something that I wanted to do.
Yeah, and I think it gets to be, as you say, the more we work on our craft, the more fluent it will be, and the easier we get for us to do something that is truly difficult musically, but we feel it. I mean, but
Right.
it sounds so easy, whatever, that whoever hears, feel it. It just happens, like.
And I do have to say, this is I believe it's a 100% commitment. I mean, there are
Yeah.
people that music is a hobby for, that's cool. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you want to be an artist, it's 100%. None of this backup crap. None of this, I'll do this, but I'll do this job in order to, no. If you're going to be an artist, you got to be an artist. That's it. At least that's what I think.
Yeah, there's no in between or halfway through. I mean, it's an expression, and it should be with your whole soul and heart. Otherwise, it's.
And it takes a lot of time. It's interesting because people say, "Oh, you guys only work, 2 sets or whatever, or 1 set," and yeah, but it's actually, in order to do
It's
that,
the lifetime.
you're
Get
working
that.
on it 7 days a week. It's 365 days a year. You're working on it.
Yeah. Well, they say no money in the world pays.
Oh, if you got paid by the hour, we'd
Development
be
of talent, yeah.
rich. We'd be richer than Elon
no.
Musk.
I was one of those kids that never left my bedroom. Once I found a bass, my parents had to knock on the door and say, "Hey, go eat something," because I will forget to eat. And
Yeah.
all day long.
That's so funny because Mays and I were actually talking right before we started this about how turning your art into your career path has different meanings, implications compared to if it is only something you do on the side while you're working.
That's a tricky thing. It's definitely tricky to turn it into a profession. And it does have its, listen, I don't care what anybody says. All of doing this is not fun. Right? I mean, traveling is not fun. Okay? I'm just going to say it honestly. Playing on stage is great. But all the stuff we have to do in order to get there,
stage. Yeah.
it's not fun. That's the part of the profession, but it's brutal.
Yeah, it's not for everybody, that's for sure.
Yeah, I do think that the sort of all the way in versus a little bit in and a little bit out, a lot of it really depends on the context. And I think context, circumstance, and just because kind of we're where we are here, it's only very recently that someone, except for a very specific kind of, for a local minority,
Right.
It's only recently that someone is able to say, I'm just a practicing artist and be able to be here. And so I think a lot of conversations that I've been having with artists, and again, kind of my experience is mostly with visual artists here, but a lot of the conversations that I've been having is then, you know, how do you do it? How do you stay within kind of a community that's getting support, that's kind of growing here, and at the same time still really be heart and soul kind of fully in.
I don't mean to say that. I mean, everybody has to do what they have to do to. I mean, I was in Shakira's band for 2 years. That was not being an artist. I mean, it was great, and you know, we got to do all kinds of cool things. That was me being a professional musician.
Right.
You know, I did commercials. You know, I was in the studio. I was doing commercials. That was being a musician, but not an artist.
Yes. Yeah, it's being surrounded. Well, you know, I keep going back to sort of this idea of the body, and it's like where you put your body, what you immerse your body in, and kind of just placing yourself somewhere where you are still thinking about your craft, or you're still
Right.
kind of
Some kind of forward motion that you keep going forward, even if you're not doing exactly what you want to do all the time. And that is important. And we all have to do that. I mean, you know, we all start playing in bars or in restaurants where you're like background music, and you know, they want you to play a certain thing and they want you to do a certain thing. As long as you keep your
Eyes on the prize.
Your eyes on the you know, that's but you have to be careful with that sideways motion, because it can take you out of your thing, and then you wake up and you're like, wow, I wanted to do this and I ended up doing this other thing.
This conversation plus what Alex mentioned about like how labels and kind of like also restrict like how you create your art reminds me of my other questions. So to be about something that Raul mentioned in the past interview, where you mentioned that for your last 5 records were created like all at home, which we were both the producer and engineer, and how like following this like about how like there are different things that can restrict you from being able to express yourself creatively. Like you said, like being in the studio, you have to like just play the beat that they want, and then that's it. Or like acting in Shakira's like band, and just like play the beat that they want, and then like that's it. So, but simply focusing on labels. Many times labels themselves can restrict one's musical creativity by putting them in a box. And then for artists, like I know we're conscious about turning your art as like your whole job into your work. You also have to focus on, okay, like, so like what can I make that'll like kind of like also be able to support myself, right? So that also kind of restricts your creativity in a sense. So with the changes brought on by the pandemic, which like I felt, or what I saw allowed like artists to kind of be able to express themselves more creatively with like technology. How has the changes brought on by the pandemic allowed you to have more freedom in your creative process and express your artistic identity more in your work?
It was huge for me in the pandemic. Oh my God, Raul knows this.
Yeah.
I received the phone call shortly after Billy Withers passed away by CBC Radio, the Canadian national radio. They chose a handful of artists throughout the country. I was one of them, inviting them to do a cover of one of his songs for this show that the radio was preparing, like a tribute show. And when that happened, I was already in a really weird mood, because my whole tour that I was going on had been canceled. You know, it was a big, huge tour in the US. And so my reaction to that was like, no, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. But talk about surrounding yourself with people that will support you. You know, my wife told me, hey buddy, don't make a decision yet. Maybe tomorrow, you decide. So tomorrow came and I said, okay, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. But they were asking us to record ourselves since we couldn't go into their studios, right? So I set up in a little corner in my living room the gear that I have, the recording gear that I have, you know, and I started working on the song that I was going to do, which is just the two of us. It was an interesting thing because my neighbor was fixing a truck, like a diesel truck that he had, so I will be, getting ready to record it, and he will turn the track on, and we will let it run for like 40 minutes, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm losing my vibe here, And then he will get in it, go around the block, and leave it for 20 more minutes, So that kind of game. But it got me going, and I got the song done, and I sent it to them. They loved it. When they said that they loved it, I said, "Ooh, maybe I can release this." First time that I record myself, maybe I can release this. Send it to my mixing engineer, and he said, "This sounds beautiful. Let me mix it for you." He mixed it. When I listened to it, I was like, "Oh my God, I can make records!" Well, I didn't stop from that point forward, and I recorded an album. The album where Raul is singing with me, and that album won me a Grammy. So I didn't know that was going to happen, of course, and if it wasn't for the pandemic, I would have not taken that step, So today, I decided to finally make a studio. For me, I turned my garage into a studio. It's quite a big space, but it's fully studio, recording studio now, and I'm forever grateful. I know it was bad for a lot of people, but
For me, it was kind of a little similar. I had been making albums in my studio for a while, but I always wanted to make an instrumental album, because all my albums were songs and singing and writing songs and everything. And I always wanted to, because I'm a dedicated guitar player as well. But there was always the tours coming up. There was never time to do it. It was always like, I want to do this someday. And then the pandemic came along, and all of a sudden there's no tour, there's no gigs, there's nothing, and you're like, okay, this is the time to do it. And I started to call up, the best guitar players in the world. I called up Mike Stern, I called up Romero Lubombo, I called up Lionel Loeke, I called up all these great guitar players. I said, what do you think? You want to do this album?
Hey, you didn't mention me.
Come on, man. I called up Alex. And I made the album, and so, what they say, you turn lemons into lemonade.
Absolutely.
I think for me, I was already in a transitional state in my practice, and I had just come back from grad school. I was just starting to think about what does it mean to set up a sustainable kind of creative practice here, and I just moved countries, and I think, it was strange times, honestly, and I was supposed to have access to a studio, and I did not have access to that studio because it was communal, and so a lot of my questions that I usually really want, or sort of arrive at moments that feel insightful or exciting in the creative research when it's really constrained.
But I have to say something about that. You don't know, and this is something I learned. Sometimes you don't know what's insightful or not. Sometimes you have to just have to do it. I'll tell you this story. When I was in music school, I was kind of a bebop head. I wasn't into songwriting at all. I was into transcribing Charlie Parker and Louis Armstrong and John Coltrane and Lester Young and Clifford Brown, and I wasn't, and at some point I said, stupid pop music, I'm gonna write a joke of a song, just because I can do it, because this shit is easy, So I wrote this song, Mystery Girl, and I played it. I was at a producer's house, actually, kind of a well-known producer in the Latin world, Rudy Perez. And I played the song, and his wife just loved it. Oh my God, and I played it a few places, and then I started noticing that I would be playing somewhere, and somebody would say, "Could you play that Mystery Girl song again?"
Boom, there you go.
And I'm like, shit, maybe this is not such a joke after all.
But exactly, it's got to get out of your head, right?
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. I thought it was a piece of crap. I'll just write this stupid song and I'll get it done, just to show everybody that I could do it. And it turned out to be something that people like. So
something that
you never know. You gotta sometimes, and a lot of times I'll if I'm in a writing block, I'll just write stream of consciousness. I'll just write, just go and just write some thing that doesn't necessarily make sense, and then maybe you come back to it and you say, oh wow, there's an idea there. You know?
Was that my brain that did this?
So it was definitely in regards to creative freedom, you know, the pandemic time for me was the most amazing example I had of my own expression, because recording that album that I recorded was nothing but being in the zone. That, you know, like if I didn't feel it, I didn't do it. You know, tomorrow, and so it really made me evaluate things now. From now on, like I was just talking to Raul, I think I will go for a while now producing my own music like that, because before I think of working with somebody else, because it was just amazing to be able to really put things on your albums as you hear them, and as you feel them. You know?
It's interesting because we are in a different era now,
Yeah.
where, you know, I work with big name producers, and I won't say that I'll never do that again, but I'll never do it again without being a co-producer myself, because I think once you've gotten your toes in that, and realizing you don't need some big name producer that you pay a lot of money to produce your stuff. You have a vision, just do your vision.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean you're not open to somebody saying something or maybe working with somebody, but
Raul, it's funny, recording this album, you know, like that, made me feel that maybe I wasn't being honest on my albums before.
absolutely. Well, I mean, you know, we all have stuff at work that we've done that you're like, oh man, if I had to do that again, I would do it differently.
Yeah. Definitely very interesting times.
Sorry. So, when you said how like this time was kind of like the pandemic for you, like while I was like open where you have able to express creative freedom, you have to kind of find like a different way to express yourself, and also like thinking and like rather focusing on like space, you said focus on time. So like thinking about like space and different spaces. Into the NYU Abu Dhabi, you expressed anxiety, seeing things happening abroad, particularly in Syria and Palestine, which are countries you have personal connections with. So my question to you is, how have you been able to create space for these conversations in your art while you're in another place? And how do these occurrences affect your artistic identity and maybe shift your perspective of what you want to create?
Big question. I mean, I will say that early in my kind of studio practice, I basically I used it as a way for me to think about kind of, you know, just being distant. What does that mean? I think I've been moving a little bit away from that. It really kind of for me it was a really kind of helpful and powerful tool to think about, kind of, and come at what's happening in a non-personal, almost kind of lateral direction. And there, you know, big questions. Millions and millions of people were kind of dealing with similar and kind of worse circumstances. And for me, it was just my way of thinking about them. It's my way of coping. And I remember, and you know, and I know people that have written music. I know people that have written poetry, and you know, and it all. And a lot of times it comes with a little bit of fiction, and that becomes kind of the distance that gives us permission to think about things that are heavy. I think now in my practice, I mean, this has been a few years ago now, and I've been leaving real life in real life. I mean, not fully. I can never live real life only in real life, but really, my practice I've been leaning more heavily onto. It's a way for me to think about things from a different perspective. and I have been trying to be playful, be playful, but not kind of yeah, kind of. I mean, you know, it's like there was a.
I can read minds. Sorry.
I love it. It's very important. I hope everyone can read minds because sometimes words don't exist. But you know, the same kind of big questions I still have, and they've sort of just they continue to lead to other questions. And to be specific, for example, I mean this. You know, the specific comment you're mentioning was when I really was struggling with why am I here when I have relatives that have grown up with kind of going through absolutely kind of insane life circumstances. And so kind of, I was thinking about that through my art practice. I think what I've been moving into more kind of thinking about how actually that particular absurdity of it. Because again, that question has been asked by, that question is something I think we all ask ourselves. Everyone has been on Instagram the past couple of years. And so I think the playfulness, the lightness has been really, really important for me as a way to be really serious, actually. Yeah. I don't know if that's at all.
The thing you said about distance, I think, is really interesting. Because I think it's hard for me to imagine what it's like, for you to be a Palestinian. That's just insane. What that must be like. That reality.
I mean, I want to say though that in a lot of ways, it sometimes seems like Palestine is just, or kind of the crisis, the Nakba, whatever,
Yeah.
is really kind of a manifestation of a lot of, or sort of a symptom of an illness that's everywhere.
Right.
And so I think actually, it's just where like the pustule popped, but actually it feels like that illness is planetary. And it's just extremely violent and visible in the case of a settler colony in Palestine. But I think, there's, especially actually over the past couple of years where a lot of conversations have been happening online, which means there's a lot more in-depth kind of thinking together with other communities that have been really kind of struggling with similar struggles, at least from different, everyone, there are facets that kind of reflect the same kind of colors of oppression.
I mean, the reason I brought it up is we're going through this situation in our country, which is nothing like Palestine, but we're going into the situation where we have, I used to have discussions with people about topics that, we disagree with. And I used to, and I had this idea that if you could just talk and express yourself intelligently enough and articulate and clearly enough that you could get your point across to somebody. And I've kind of lost that because there's a lot of people that no matter what you say, and no matter what happens, right, they're going to think the way they think. I mean, we have in our country right now a guy that has done so many bad things that was our former president, and he's still walking around free. It is unbelievable. And yet, it doesn't really matter what you say. And that's why I brought up the thing about, Palestine, because it seems like it's in some ways so sad and so, I don't know, hopeless. But,
As hopeless as anything else, I think, is. But, actually, that question of hope is really interesting because
reality is an interesting thing.
But you know, but also it's like it is. I feel like it's actually really difficult to separate creative expression from hope. And so, however hopeless something is, if it's, you know,
Yes.
you know, that we make art because there is a little kernel of something can change, or that there is some, like for me, it's really a change in the in a collective imagination.
You can bypass some of that circuitry with art. You can get to people in a way that you can't with just talking to them. Somehow you can kind of bypass some of that closeness with art.
I feel like that's like a really nice, like, not ending because we still have like a couple minutes left, but ending to the first part of the session. Like, thank you so much for like your thoughtful answers. I'd like to open up to the crowd if you guys have any questions that you'd like to ask these amazing artists. Feel free.
So I have a question. I know there's been a lot of talk about sort of wearing multiple hats and having a home studio and being your own producer and then being an artist. Mays, you were talking before about being all in or half in as an artist. And I first knew you as a curator and as an arts manager and not as a practicing artist. So I'm curious, kind of, do you see yourself as being all in or half in that duality? And how do you see the sort of the multiple hats as people are thinking about sort of navigating the world and the arts and which hats to wear and how do they work together or against one another? I'm just kind of curious to talk a little bit about that idea of half in or all in.
I can talk about this a lot because it's a thing that I mean, and I'll talk about it in kind of specifically in the context of here, but for me, it's always been there are pros and cons to whatever way you practice your practice and you make it sustainable, unless you are lucky enough to not need to make your own kind of living situation.
Right.
Then there are always pros and cons, and I am going to make statements now that I'm not actually fully sure of, and I think it's something that I continue to kind of think about and try to figure out every day. But if having a job that is not my art practice frees my art practice to do certain things that otherwise I probably would not be able to do. And for me, that was at some point a very deliberate decision. Of course, not only motivated by giving myself that freedom, also motivated by very practical concerns, but I was at a moment after grad school where I was like, what now? You know, we've got now a new visa system. I actually maybe can kind of figure my way out as a just full-time practicing artist. But really for me, having to pile up that pressure and anxiety on my practice to be quote-unquote productive felt very counterintuitive to the way that I actually think about practice. And so where I've found myself is in a space where I still can ask interesting questions. It's definitely, it's institutional, it's a lot more about collaboration, about hearing other people's voices. But more and more I see my own kind of practice, my own questions that I have in my studio seep into it. I don't entirely know if that's a good thing or a bad thing yet. Because I also do find myself often thinking about, new interesting kind of, I'm excited about a new topic, or I'm excited about something that I've discovered, and I'm like, oh, do I make this into a project at work where it becomes this bigger thing? It's bigger than myself, but it's also not mine. Or do I keep this just mine and it's sort of limited? And I don't know. And I just, I've been out of the country just for this weekend because I specifically wanted to think about, I wanted to completely kind of take myself out of my immediate context and think about, you know, at what point sort of that elastic needs to come back really, really hard, and at what point it's just a slow kind of ebb and flow if sort of the center is practice and the orbit is kind of a more collaborative way of working. So I don't know. I mean, what I've been thinking of more recently is that there needs to be very specific, dedicated moments of removal from the practical, and yeah, there is this sort of like tension that happens between kind of where do you put your creative energy, where do you, how do you schedule creative time? I mean, this is kind of the most absurd thing for me. It's like, how do I schedule studio time? I don't know how to schedule studio time. So I don't know, it's something that I'm thinking. I mean, residencies exist for exactly this reason, right? So, I mean, residencies are to take you out of your daily kind of concerns, daily kind of whatever responsibilities, so you only think about your art. So, but I don't know. My answer is I don't know. I think I know I don't want to put the pressure of my livelihood on my practice. That I do know.
It's interesting because I have some pretty strong opinions. I realized at some point when I was young that being blind means that everything takes longer. I don't care what it is that you're doing. Homework, you know, whatever it is, you got to work twice as hard as everybody else to do the same thing. And I also realized that unlike most people, I don't have the option of doing something until I can do something else. Like I don't have well, I'll be a waiter, right? I'd be a really bad waiter. You know, or I'll, I don't know, pump gas while I do this thing to make a living. Or I'll work a construction job or something. I didn't have any of that option. So that's why I have this perspective of, okay, if I'm going to do this, then I'm going to be a badass MF. Because it's the only way that I even have a chance. So that's my perspective.
Yeah, circumstance kind of really colors.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else have any other questions?
So, going to that idea of music, going on in music being your life, your job, if you want to call it that. For me as a starting artist, I'm studying music right now, but I'm starting out. When was the point that it clicked on you that, oh, this is my job now, this is my life now? Because it's not like with many other careers that you would get hired by a company, get a salary, or
Right.
at least for me, coming from a Mexican household, like the definition of, or the way that they see your living, which is, oh, a stable job, a salary, this, that, like things that when I said, oh, I'll study music, I thought would be, oh, what about this, what about that? So my question is, when did that part click for you guys?
You want to go first, or should I go first?
Go Alex. Because and then
Because we were just talking about beginning today, right?
Yes.
Starting it.
that's the worst.
Raul and I were just talking about that. Well, the truth is, and hopefully this doesn't sound weird to you, because we come from different era, of course. But I get asked that question, when did you constantly decided that this was going to be your work, your living? Right? And my answer is, I never made that decision.
That's my answer too. I never said, okay, now I've made enough money or now I just said, I just happened. And sometimes you have to do shitty things. Like, you know, like I worked in a classic rock band for a while. I didn't like, you know, but I played Susie Q every night, you know, but I was doing music. And I was, you know, writing during the day I was working on my stuff. I was working on getting better as a musician. And I was $70,000-$80,000 in debt. I had just gone to music school and had gotten all these student loans, and I'm working in a freaking classic rock band for like $75 a night. And, you know, but I never thought, well, because what am I going to do? What else am I going to do, right? So for me, so in a way, it's a calling. Right?
Oh, definitely, yeah.
I tell people all the time, if you have a doubt, do it as a hobby.
Yeah.
Do it as a hobby. There's nothing wrong with that.
I have, because I get asked that same question, you know, quite a bit. People that are just beginning to do it. And yes, you're beginning. It's a beautiful thing that you're trying to do music. The question, you know, that it happened to me quite a bit when people ask me, I'm a musician, and they ask me, what's your real job? You know, music kind of, it's looked that way in many places. You know. But I'm gonna say one thing to you, because you're beginning now. You still have the power to choose, and that's a beautiful thing. Don't choose only music. If you can do all the things with your beautiful brain, you know, take your brain to where you want to go.
Absolutely.
And that means don't put all of your eggs in one basket. You know, because if I had the chance to go back and, you know, I will do that. I will have been taking music production from the beginning, because I've learned it on the go, right? But I would then, from the beginning, I would even taking all the things, you know, at the same time, because I think the human brain is capable of doing many things at once.
But I also think that that's something that if you're open to learning, like, you know, we have other hobbies. I'm a ham radio operator, for example. I learned Morse code when I was a little kid, and I like talking to people all over the world. And I have met so many people that way.
It's incredible.
And you know, I skied. I was a national champion skier at one point when I was young. But I'm not now. Don't.
I don't even try myself. Man.
But I'm saying, you know, it was never like, it was just like part of being human and saying, okay, I'm gonna do the things that I love to do, and you know. But music was always a huge part of it.
But I want to make it clear, sorry to go back to it, I want to make it clear the reason why I'm talking this way. Because music these days, is at a different state.
Yeah.
We all have to agree on that, because that's the truth. Some 80,000 something songs hit the market kind of every day, something like that.
Everybody is doing it now.
Then
Alex and I
how do
were
you-
talking about starting out today would be
Crazy. I wouldn't know how to do it.
I don't even have words for what it would be.
I mean,
Because we both started out in a different time.
yeah. So I feel that anything I have to say is probably so irrelevant, you know, towards today, because it will be only traditional, you know, where I will say, oh, we did this, and you did a demo, you took it to this guy, and you found a place to play, and then you start inviting important people to see you, like a booking agent, you know.
Right.
That's all out the window. You know?
Well,
Your place now is YouTube and TikTok.
We both, you know, shop to record labels, you know,
Yeah.
you know, and did all that. And I'm not sure that that's really what you want to do today. I wouldn't necessarily go shop to record labels today.
No, just do something completely crazy, out of the ordinary, that will call attention.
Yeah,
I mean, don't harm yourself. But
but you know, the same thing. You know, I moved to New York, and Bill saw this because he was there. But I moved to New York. I was in my 30s. I do not recommend that, by the way. I do not recommend that. But you know, like I was already like, from the music business standpoint, I was a grandpa already. Forget about it. You know, you're supposed to do this in your 20s or even in your teens, right?
exactly.
And I think the thing that helped me was that I was just different. You know, in New York, there's two things or there's at least one thing that they're always looking for: different,
Yeah.
different. Because there's a million people playing guitar and singing their songs. You can go to any number of venues and see that. You can see a million bands, you know, playing, trying to make it, and it's like, how do you stand out from all that? And being just crazily different, and just standing out in some way can really help you.
Yeah, what does that mean with like the internet, right? I mean, how can
Exactly.
But-
That's what we're saying today
yeah.
is just.
And I mean, but this is, I mean, I feel like this makes it really overwhelming to practice something that you just want to do because you really want to do it.
And the other thing I have to say, the other real difference today, music is free, man. You can go to YouTube and get anything you want. And that sucks because it devalues what we do.
You know, I just,
It's great for you guys, consumers. It's
Yeah.
great because you can get anything you want.
I just changed my mind in regards to, because I was thinking, life would have been different if when we started, you know, we had the internet. But you know what? I'm glad we didn't have the internet. I'm so glad we didn't have the internet when we started, because the internet, I think, this is my opinion, was great for a while, but now has turned into something very, that I think is affecting,
It's harmful.
it's harming the human brain in regards to developing something, you know. It's making everything look too quick
Absolutely.
and fake. I mean, so it's like,
What he's
turn
saying,
off the internet.
what he's saying is the internet makes you think that everything, that you can do everything quick.
Exactly.
You
It's
know,
about-
instead of going to the library, you can Google stuff now, right from your, but you cannot Google getting good at an instrument.
Mhm.
I don't care how many video, play with videos you do and all that. It just takes time, man. It's like making wine. You can't rush making a good bottle of wine.
Oh, and it has shortened our attention span, and it has sort of taken the soul out of a lot of things.
Well, and it gives you all, it shows you quite a big spectrum of variety. I mean, I'm not sort of super, the attention span and sort of like this quick gratification is really, really like a big but an unfortunate kind of aspect of just how we live right now. But kind of just going back to like how do you start? And I know the question is not for me because I don't do anything that has anything to do with music, but for me it's like really the fact that we've got the internet wasting something, and that's the pressure that I feel I have to consciously take off of
Yeah.
my practice.
I can understand that.
Me too.
So for me, it's like if I need to be successful now, I'm never going to actually be exploring what I'm interested in exploring.
Absolutely.
Well, ignorance can be a good thing. When you're young, you don't know. If you knew what it was going to take, you would.
Ignorance
You
is
don't
the
do it.
best
You don't
thing.
do it.
The freeze out. You know, it's
I
like,
think
wow, that's too much.
ignorance, though, like being a beginner at something and not having that anxiety to not be a beginner very quickly is really great, because that's how you find who you are in
Yeah.
in whatever it is, discipline that you're in.
Not to interrupt you, sorry, because it's like really also hear more as a senior who's interested in like going into the music industry. But
No.
Wait, don't do it.
Oh.
Guess I'm still the
I'm
boy
just
side.
if I had a child that was going to go into the music industry, I think I would do everything I could.
Right.
But on the other hand, if it's a calling, if you see that they are absolutely hell bent on it,
Yeah.
then you can't. But if there was any doubt, I would be like, you're really good at math. Why don't you? Why don't you do that science class? Take that chemistry.
Yeah.
That's exactly what you're doing now. Like, oh my gosh, like, okay, music, that's crazy. So when you become a
for coming. Thank you so much for being with us and for this very, very inspiring talk. And I've been repeating in my head some of the things that you were saying, and one of the things is about the difference between being a musician and being an artist. And I was like, whoa, that's we can apply to so many things in our lives. A reminder to book your tickets for the concert on Thursday. I think it will be even more meaningful after this beautiful conversation. And the talk will be available on YouTube for free in a few days.
You know what I'm talking about?
And thank you so much. And